Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our LIU LearnOn webinar series on face-to-face moving to virtual instruction. Today, we're going to be talking about labs and interactives for both math and science teachers. Uh, my name is Ben Smith. I am the Supervisor of Educational Technology at the Lincoln Intermediate Unit. This is the team that's bringing you all the content that is being hosted on the LearnOn website. You can see my email is highlighted there. Specifically here, in this case, I'm a former physics teacher. I've also worked with K-12 science to try and help them work through integration of technology. And in addition, I've taught a number of math classes. And so I think in this case specifically, I can provide some supports as you move to online instruction. One thing I would add is that when I was teaching in the class, I was teaching in a digital classroom. And so we did just about everything using technology. And so hopefully we'll make this an interactive session for you. A few things that are different about this webinar, actually in comparison to our others. One is I have enabled chat for everybody. So if you go into the chat feature, you'll be able to post information there. And the reason that we did that is it's a smaller group, and we thought that this might lend itself a little bit more towards some dialogue. The one thing that you can do is you can go into the chat now and put in the subject and grade level that you teach, because that may adjust how we share some of the information as we go through the webinar. When you go in there, you should be able to choose whether you send it to all panelists or to all panelists and attendees. So you're welcome to just send it to myself and Nicole, or you're welcome to send it out to everybody. So we see a couple of folks have put in biology, science, physical science, and we figured that a lot of this will be there. We have some elementary folks in here as well, and this information will be applicable to you. For K2, I will say we'll take a look at that in particular, but a lot of what we're looking at is probably geared more towards 4 through 12th grade, but there are some pieces for sure in the tools we're going to share that are in that area. So I appreciate you guys sharing that information. That's going to be helpful to us. You can, now what I would say is for questions, please use the Q&A pod. That'll make it a little easier for Nicole and I to pick out where the questions are, but you can also feel free to share some resources in there. There's about 30 of us, 25 or 30 of us in this webinar room today. We've had, for a lot of our webinars, we've had hundreds of people, and so the chat can get a little unwieldy there. If you actually want to talk, you can raise your hand and we'll open up the microphone for you and you can unmute yourself and chat. And then we'll just remind you at the end as well to please complete the Act 48 link, and we'll share that out at the end of the webinar. So in this set of changing expectations for online learning, this is a place where we see that schools are having an extended closure. The governor has closed schools indefinitely. And as we think about that, schools have a choice of either continuity of education or no instruction. And if, as is most of the schools in our area, they've chosen continuity of education, they've got to use either planned instruction or enrichment and review. And as you work through this and you think about how you're going to teach these courses, especially in math and science, they're content heavy. There's a lot of information in there. And so if you're going to do planned instruction, you're going to need some tools like the ones we're going to share here. I'm going to give you sort of the 2 caveats we have here. The first is that what we're looking at trying to do is have you be able to use interactive activities to use them with students online. We know that interactivity is a key to success for students. That, you know, giving them a worksheet, just that's not going to be the most effective. And so we really want to create some of those areas that students can be interactive, and this will be the topic here. Now, the little piece here at the bottom is sort of a caveat, which is we're not going to go through the entire demonstration. We're going to show you the ideas, and then you're going to need to probably do a little bit more research on your own. We know that you guys are working really hard to try and get your classes going. And so if you do need help, please reach out to your tech coaches, but also feel free to reach out to us in this area. And specifically for math and science, I think we might be able to help you a little bit with this. So I just, when I think about labs and interactives and how that's going to work, the one piece that I wanted to add is that we want to make labs interactive, and this is going to be a great way to do it. Now, I highlighted, and I know this is meant for math and science, but as I look at most of the folks that are in the chat, there's a lot of science folks, but, and I pulled up just one of the next generation science standards that shows plan, it says right down here, plan and conduct investigations. And so, so when I think about like, what I want to do, like right there, right, plan and conduct investigation. So in an extended period of time, a whole marking period, I would hope that students would be doing some of that work over the course of the year. And so that's why conducting labs online is going to be difficult, but I think it's possible. And then let's talk about some considerations. So these are things you need to think about before we jump into the tools. So one is, are you going to be able to get your students to log in? And so if you pick a tool where you have to create a login, then that's going to be one of those places that you may want to think about. And the second is, will it work on your machine? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but you need to make sure that you know what are the devices your students are using. So if they're using iPads, you may have to choose a particular solution or look for solutions that are different than if they're working on Chromebooks or if they're working on their phones. So you're going to need to think about that in advance because as you think about equitable access for all students, you want to make sure that they're going to be able to use the tool that you choose. And so if your students are split and they're kind of all using on their own, then that's going to be another consideration for you to think about. Another consideration is, how are you going to get them to do group work? So a lot of lab work is done in groups. And as you think about that, that's going to be one of those pieces that I believe you're going to have to think about. How do we get that to happen? Of course, that's synchronous work. So, if you wanted to hold a lab class, if I were going to do this, what I would do is I would use Zoom as I'm using now. I would gather all my students into the Zoom room. So one class at a time. And I might have 20 to 30 students, hopefully no more than 30, but I might have that many. And then I would use the breakout rooms to get them to work in groups. And so you can then visit those stations. Now, I wouldn't do this every day, but this is a possibility. If you're running a lab course and you want to hold a lab once a week, maybe one period, you could run a 30-minute lab where you would ask the students, please do your best to try and connect at this time. We know, with the way that home lives are going, this may not be possible for all students, but it is a possibility that you could do this. And then using those breakout rooms, you put the students into their groups and you could then visit those groups to talk to them about what's happening. So it is possible to do it. There are some challenges. The other way that you can do this is to assign students to work collaboratively. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday where we did some Q&A where they could all be working in a Google Doc offline, or synchronously, and using the chat feature in there to sort of talk about some of the things they're doing. So there are some opportunities if you revisit some of our webinars, and if you have questions, please start populating those questions, and we can talk more about that if you need to talk a little bit more in depth there. You're also going to want to consider how you're going to do the directions for this. So remembering that if you've never used one of these tools before, you're going to have to explain to the students, how do you log in? How do you get access? What do you do if it doesn't work on your end? How do you get support? All that has to be done front loaded. So that's almost a lesson in and of itself. And then you have to assign the work. And then the final piece that you have to consider is the assessment. So if I have students doing this type of work, I definitely want to provide them feedback as a part of the assessment. And I know that a number of schools are moving away from grades or numerical grades towards either OSU or pass-fail for this last marking period of the year. And so you just want to think about how are you going to assess it and how are you going to provide students feedback, critical feedback on the work that they're doing. So let's talk about some interactive tools, and I'm going to focus mostly on science. I'll show some math tools as well, and then at the end I'm going to sort of do a lead-in for one of the next tools that you'll probably get later in the day. So one of the tools I use is PhET, and I would just ask, how many of you already use PhET as a part of that? It's always free. So you're welcome to type into the chat, yes, you use it, or no, you don't, just so you get a sort of little sense. And to me, this is a great tool. In fact, it goes all the way back. PhET goes back a number of years. When I was in the classroom, I actually contributed. So, this is one of those tools where it's free out of the University of Colorado, but they work on donations. I actually donate to it. It's one of my charitable causes because I used it so much. I felt like I needed to be able to do that. Explore Learning is the second one. This was another one that we used, and Explore Learning, or Gizmos as it's called, it has gone free during the pandemic that's taking place. But I will tell you that one of the things that I did was negotiate secondary pricing for my school. We started using Explore Learning really right from the very beginning. In fact, we were helping them out with some of the beta testing, including when they moved over to HTML5, and we were able to get discounts on that. So it's free now. It would cost later, and so you just need to keep that in mind. And then we'll talk a little bit about some other tools that you use in addition, and then we're going to jump to NearPod as a way to sort of bring all this together. So those are the tools that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to start with PhET. And for PhET, I put in this as a screenshot to sort of help you, and somebody already referred to it. PhET is they have some of their interactives that have this symbol, and that means they run on Java, which means they're not going to run on all machines. They're not going to run on an iPad for sure, and so it can be an issue for them as students try and access any of those. So one of the things I do say is, okay, so if that one doesn't work, then don't use it. And I know that's simplistic, but it would be easy to sort of sit there and say, oh, I just wish I could use that. Now, if it has this symbol, that means it's HTML5, which means it's compatible with most modern browsers, and you should be able to jump out and use that, and you can use that on an iPad as well. So I jumped over to the PhET site so you can see it, and what I wanted to point out is, so when you go here, first of all, there is no login. So in that case, it's much easier to use with students because you can just point them directly towards that particular simulation. You can, of course, explore down here in the buttons. So I saw lots of chemistry and biology folks. So if you want, you can click down here. You can also go up and take a look. So if you're like, I know I need to use HTML5, you can sort just by HTML5. You can also look by grade level. So let's just jump into that for the moment. And what you'll see, and especially because I know we have some elementary folks on board here, is that you can click on the elementary school and see which of the simulations is most appropriate for that area. And then, of course, you can, as you look at elementary, you can see that, but you can also then jump to like middle or high school or wherever you might need to. You can also search by device, so this is also very helpful. So if you're looking for like which works on an iPad or which works on a Chromebook, search for that first. So I did see the question, what is HTML5? HTML5 is a new format that allows for content that is in a web page to be formatted for a modern browser. And so one way that people would write the underlying code for some of these is to use something called Java or JavaScript, and that won't run on a browser that's on an iPad, for example, and it won't run in some of the most modern browsers. And you may see things like, those that remember used to have to update Shockwave all the time, and Shockwave was one of those tools that people could create these little interactives. And so as time has changed, and we've evolved our technology, not all of that has sort of moved up to that. So this is a great way for you to sort of go into those simulations. And if I jump back to a particular simulation, and I'll just jump into like the bending light, what you'll see here when you get there is that they have information for teachers. And so down here are all these teacher submitted ideas, and some of them have been vetted by the PhET site, so by the University of Colorado, and you can see that information here. And then there's a whole host, and these are directional sheets. So this helps you get a quick start on your work, so that if you're like, okay, I've got to create, so not only do I have to find it, now I've got to create PDFs. And so they have like an overview of helps. They have a primer here that will help you. You'll notice it says, please sign in to watch. So if you create a teacher account, then you are able to sign in and watch this piece, which helps for teachers. So they're trying to keep that information separate from the students, because the students can go here and then they can see how to get this. The one thing you'll notice is they have an embed code. So if you're using an LMS, you can embed directly into your LMS. So I'm talking about like Schoology or Canvas, okay? And then you can also use Google Classroom. So for me, this is a great way for students to work through it. And somebody said they're actually using this particular one with their astronomy students. So that's great. So you can see, you know, they have an introduction to it, and then, you know, they're like, I can start to move this around, or I can set it up to array, and then run through things. I can change the indices of refraction, and I can move through all the different pieces that I need to. So this becomes a great way to work through things. I also have tools that I can bring out, so that if I needed to take measurements. And so if you think about lab, the students can start collecting actual data here and use that data to conduct experiments. So so I think that it has all of the pieces that you really need to actually go through and maneuver it. So, you know, like you can think like you can actually change the index of refraction of the air to different places, and then measure it. And then you can also measure the intensity. So there are a lot of variables that you can work through in here. And so if I just hit the plus sign, you can see that, or the little button to turn it on. Right now I have this ray, and it does a really nice job for those that are in the physics area, you know, of showing what's happening to the wavelengths. There's a reflected piece, there's a refracted piece. I can change the index of refraction to show what happens more. So you can be using this just as I am if you're doing a lecture. So if you wanted to do a demonstration as a lecture, you can do that. But I think it's going to be really powerful in having your students work through it. So maybe you do a short screencast where you introduce the concept, but then you go back and work through it. So I did see a note that Actively Learn is a site that embeds PhET into it, and you'll see more and more sites doing that as they work through. And actually, I'm going to jump right to NearPod. I have the slide later in the slide deck. I'm going to jump right over to NearPod and show you that. Let me go for a moment. Let me just go back to my library. So if I go back to my library, it looks like this. And so you can see I have different lessons in here, and I can deploy these lessons as a live lesson or as a student-paced lesson. But if I click over here where it says NearPod Lesson Library, what you're going to find is that I would just go to the top and type in PhET and hit search. And depending on your user account, so what you'll see is I have access to all of these. So all of these are in here, and as I continue to go, and for those that were thinking, again, for the littles, K2, here are some K2 PhET simulations that you can use. So the balloon static lab, so if you think about if you rub a balloon, if I had hair on my hair, and then you stick it on the wall, that's a great little simulation, and that works with AP physics kids all the way down to kindergartners. So so these are already lessons that are set up that take you through all those pieces. So you can search through there for that. But one caveat I want to mention is that those simulations, if depending on your school account, might cost money. So please look, and I'll show you on a slide later on, you'll see where it says free or it says there's a cost, and just recognize that you might be able to contact NearPod and see if they'll change those to free during the pandemic. So we have the site. Accessibility, if I go back over to PhET, they have an accessibility page, and so that link takes you out. So talking about how do you make all these simulations accessible, I think is really important, and so we want to emphasize that as well for you. And the big advantage is you don't need to have student accounts for it, so the setup is a lot easier. Now let me move over to PhET for NearPod and just remind you that, again, you want to look to see if there's a cost there for it. Now I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to talk about Explore Learning. And Explore Learning is a pay-for site. I think somebody put in what the cost is. It is really, I do find it to be expensive, but valuable. And so we were able to again, make use of this. But right now would be a great time for you to at least test and use it. You can create a teacher account. You get access to everything for free. And so, in the short term, it's really nice. What I like about NearPod or Explore Learning is that, and you can just go to explorelearning.com, is that they have things set up by academic standard, by grade and topic, and by textbook. And so if you want to take a look at things, you can. You can set up a class and set up a class code. So I've actually set up a class. You're welcome to join my class. That's the class code there. So if you go to explorelearning.com, then you can say, I have a class code. The students will have to do put some information in there. They will create an account, but then you're able to manage them and see their answers as they go through. I included a link to a quick start guide. So if you want to take a look, you can. And now I want to jump out to Explore Learning and show you the teacher view of this. So this is the teacher view for Explore Learning. Now, you can see, like, I have a class. You can add up to 6 classes with 40 students each. Again, I created a free account here. So what you see is what you would have access to. And then the place to really go is under Find Gizmos. So if I go up under Find Gizmos, right, I can do it by academic standard, grade, and topic. So I'm just going to start here with academic standards. And what you'll notice is that they have the PA standards in here. So when I click on PA standards for math and science, I can actually choose the grade level I have. And so for me, this is a great opportunity. I saw we had some chemistry teachers in here. So if I click on chemistry, you can pick the chemistry standard that you want, and you can see which particular gizmos actually will apply to that standard. So if you're, in terms of trying to find the right thing, when you think about PhET being free, one of the things about that is that it doesn't have the link out to the direct PA standards, whereas Explore Learning, which is a pay-for service, does. If I go back up here and I go to grade and topic, I can look and again see, and again, this doesn't apply to K2, although some of the PhETs did. Here you see that it does have each of those places. So I could say, okay, well, I'm a middle school physical science teacher, and I would do something on speed and velocity, and I can go in. And then when you're ready, you would just click Add to Class. So you click on that button. But if I wanted to, I could jump into the gizmo itself. And so I'm just going to launch the gizmo here. I'll point out there is some lesson info, but when I launch the gizmo, you're going to see that there, here I have the gizmo, and I can start to run the person, and I can create however I want. They do have a student exploration worksheet. They have a teacher guide. They have a vocabulary sheet. You can see they're available as PDFs or as Word. And so if they're in Word, you can download that as Word, upload it to your Google Drive, and then edit it if you want to send that out to students, okay? You can see that they're holding on to the answer key for the exploration sheet to subscribers only. So I'm not sure if that'll become free or not, but I'll also point out that they have contributing teacher supports. So you're able to get in and see some of the other pieces that teachers have created. So this is, this is sort of the quick tour of how you work through, and then they have assessment questions down at the bottom that students can go through, and they can click check your answers, and they'll get some immediate feedback there. So, to me, those are a couple of great places that you can go. The question, can you use my code temporarily? There's less than 40 in here, so you shouldn't have a problem getting into the class code. So if you want to check it out, what I'll tell you is I loaded in a few. I'm going to click back over there. I did load into my class a few Gizmos that you can try out, just a couple of different ones, and for my class roster, I can manage it. I self-enrolled one of our sample accounts so that I can have that, and then I can send that information. And this is where you can manage their password, because what you're going to find is kids are going to struggle a little bit with passwords, and so if you have to go back in, you can help them. You'll know what their username is, and you'll know what their password is as well. So so that helps. So feel free to join into my classroom and then just try out a Gizmo or two and see what it looks like from a student perspective. But what I wanted to, let me point out. So this is the personal information that students will have to put in. They'll have to put in their first name, last name, and email address. Notice not required for students. So if they don't put in their email address, then you won't be able to contact them through that, but it's okay. This is good, especially for students that might not have an email address, but then they will have to create a username, reminding students that it should be school appropriate, and try to think about how you want them to format that, and give the students that information up front. So I would tell my students, I want you to put RL, last name, first name, because I taught at Redline, and that way I could see all their pieces, and it would format nicely and align with my gradebook, and then they create their password. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Wild Wild West. So if you're looking for some other topics, there are other free things out there. And what you do is you go to Google and type in applet and whatever the topic is, and you're going to see a lot of things that come in. Some of them are going to work. Some of them aren't. They're going to have it is really literally the Wild Wild West, but that will get you a chance to see some interactives, and you're going to need to test them out before you can really use them with students. And if they don't work, please don't use them with your kids. This is where I wanted to point out real quick about the information, whether NearPod's charging you or not for some of their lessons that they have in there. All right, so let's take a few minutes here at the end just to talk about assessment. So, one thing that you can do both with PhET and Explore Learning is that they have worksheets that are already available, and students can download them. Even when I was in the classroom, I really didn't like using worksheets. I kind of like them as a guide. So I might give them to the students and say, here's what I want you to do. And you should be thinking about it, but I'm not grading this worksheet. So even though it has questions that are built into it, what happens here, I just want you to go through it, and I'm not grading that. And instead, at the end, I'm going to ask them open-ended questions to get at whether or not they understand what happened. And so one of the ways to do that is to do a screencast. What did you do? What did you find out? And how do you know what you found out? And when you think about that, it's one of those things that you can really work through to try and have them explain what they understand is happening. And so if you're thinking about, like, how does this work, and how do I get this to get students to explain to me their understanding of what happened? I think these three questions really, for me, do a great job of sharing that information out. And so I would remind you to check out our explaining webinar. I linked it directly here, where we talk about ways that both you can explain concepts and students can explain concepts. And so so I want to explain how I do a screencast for this specifically. I'm going to use Flipgrid. So I'm going to stop my share for a moment, and I'm going to share out another view to you. So what you should see now is I'm on Flipgrid. Now I'll show you the teacher side in a moment, but But what I did was I created a flip grid, and for the students, they're going to come down here and they're going to hit in the plus sign. Now, when they hit the plus sign, they have to log in with an account. So that will also be important. So I'm going to have them log in with their account. So I've logged in, and then it brings up this window and it's ready to go. All I need to do is hit here and I can record. So one simple way to do things is just to have students, what do you do? What do you find out? And how do you know what you found out in a minute or less? Because right now you can see up here in the clock, 1 minute. And so if I start that video, it's going to start ticking down, and they have 1 minute to address that. So that's fine. But one of the other features, which is new, is if I click on those 3 dots, you'll see it says screen recording. Well, now I can do a screen recording of my simulation. So I'm going to hit that and we'll try it. Now, remember, hold on, I'm going to go back out here a second and just show you one more thing here. When I hit the 3 dots, it says screen recording. Notice it says beta. Beta means might not work. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I just want them to give it a try. But I'm going to hit the beta, and I'm going to hit screen recording. And what it'll give me a chance to do is your entire screen or your application window. So I'm going to do just my application window, and I'm going to do this screen here, and I'm going to hit share. And so now it does 3, 2, 1, and it counts down. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over to my simulation, and I'm going to say, okay, well, you know, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put out a bunch of points, and I'm going to try and do a curve fit here, and I'm going to go through and put my line of best fit on, and I find that this has a slope of 0.9 and 0.28, and then if I move these points down, what I see happening is that the chi-squared and the r-squared values are changing, and what I'm looking for is a value of 1 will tell me that, yes, that's a straight line, and so that's the best fit. And so, like, I would just have the students go through this and then jump back over and hit stop recording. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over to my simulation, and so now what you can see is, as I scroll through, you can see that it's actually walking me through what I did. So what I tell students is, I want you to do a screencast that tells me what did you do, what did you find out, how you know what you found out in a minute or less using a tool like this. So let me stop my screen share for a moment and start back up over here. And what I want to point out is on the educator side for this, so on the educator side, I would just hit add new grid. And then when I hit add new grid, it's going to ask me, how do I want kids to sign in? I would want them to sign in with their school email. And then it's going to give me a code that I send to the students. So this simply, I would actually, I'm going to call this my PhET summarizer, and then click on their school email, give them that code, hit next, and it will actually send it out to all of my students. So I'm not gonna create that, but then what'll happen is on the back end, I'll have a new topic that has explaining videos, and they'll all appear right here for me to go through for the students. So that's how I would do the screen share piece of Flipgrid and try and work through that. So yeah, I guess I couldn't fully monitor it. It was a little bit dark only because I'm trying to do multiple things all in one case. So I don't think it'll be as gray in case you're wondering. So I appreciate that. So, so I'd like you to just take a moment to sort of think about, what you're going to take away from this. I would hope that you're going to be able to think about using either the PhET or the Explore Learning tools, because it creates that interactivity for students that they can get involved. It's not the same as doing a lab where you're working on all of it by hand, where it's all in front of you. But it does provide a way for students to work interactively through their materials. So, so think about what you're going to take away from this and how you're going to work through it. I just want to remind you that that our LearnOn site has all of the webinars for today. The next one coming up is reaching out to families and students. And then you can see the rest of the schedule right in here. We have some additional sessions coming up for math. And I would expect that one of the tools that we didn't discuss that I'll highlight just as a moment is, if you're a math teacher, is if you're looking for the interactivity, Gizmos is a great way to do that. And this is probably for a little bit older students, but Gizmos does a lot of interactivity for that. And so, that's the piece that we want to talk about. Please populate the Q&A pod if you have questions. We're going to answer those here. I would ask you to please go and fill out the evaluation. I do see we have a couple of questions here. So one, what can students see of each other's grid videos? In the videos, they can see all of the videos. Now, I believe you can set it to be private so that they can't, but I actually like it for them to see each other's videos. If you're like, nah, I don't want them to see each other's videos, then you might want to use a tool like Screencastify, have them screencast just as they did for me, but send it directly to you, and then you're the only one that was able to grade it. Another question says that if you said they'll email out to the students, can I have them go to the Flipgrid app and put in the code? Yes, you can have them put in the, in fact, that's what I would have them do, is I would just tell them, here's the code, or you can send them that link. And in fact, if I go back over to Flipgrid, when you hit the share button, you can copy the link. You can send it to Google Classroom. You can send it to Remind, which is another great way to do it. And then you can share the QR code with them. Can students comment on each other's videos? That's a setting that you can enable or you can turn off. So you can allow it. And you'll also notice, make it easy for guests to access the topic. So I don't want that. I actually want students to only be able to get in with their login, okay? The next question is, what's your recommended time frame for a lesson on Flipgrid for them to get the hang of it? For kids that are tech savvy, they get it almost immediately. They hit the plus sign, they hit record. And so, so that part generally doesn't have a long learning curve, but I do recognize that it won't be intuitive for everybody. And so if I jump over to our LearnOn site, what I would point out is that we have, under the free online tools, if you click the little down arrow, we have some tutorials that can help them. And so you can see like getting started, but getting started for students. So this is a short tutorial for the kids. And I think if they watch that, the majority of your kids will be fine with it. So I don't think it takes very long. I'm going to say 5 minutes. I don't know if Nicole has a thought on that to sort of learn how to use it. And then there's some additional information if you want it on Flipgrid here on the LearnOn site. So having said that, the link here at the bottom also will provide you with a chance to submit for your Act 48 hours. In case you're new to our sessions, you can get Act 48 for each of these surveys. You just complete the survey that you see here. You'll be directed to this splash screen where you can hit continue. So at this point, I don't see any other questions. I think we've answered everything. So I want to thank you guys for coming today and talking a little bit about the interactives. And if you have any other information, if you need any other information, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. So thank you guys very much, and we'll see you guys for our next webinar.